It's 9:30 in the morning. Do you know who the chartists are? Do you know where they are? Do you know where they went? Do you know where they came from? No. I'm going to answer for you. No. No one was there for the chartists when they started out in 1838. Charles Dickens wasn't there for them. I love Charles Dickens. Man, this is not his place. This conversation is not for him. Charles Dickens wasn't there. No one else in the 19th century was there for them. No one in the 20th century. Modernity. People are thinking, oh, we're having change. Maybe we'll discover some odd literature. No. Nothing. Post-modernity? Nada. 21st century? No. Not until. No one was there for them for almost 200 years until Madison Rose Howarth, 2024, Michaelmas term, week 7, Victorian module essay, submitted to Robert Douglas Fairhurst. Don't all applaud at once. I was there for them. I came, I conquered. I wrote a 2,000 word essay on chartists when there's about 2 critical books and 2 collections of all the poems, and those 2 books, the same books. The criticism and the poems are in the same books. I was there for them. Let's learn about them. Okay, I'm being a bit dramatic there, but as Justin Bieber said, it's not clocking to you. It's not clocking to you that I am standing on business. I am standing on business right now and saying the Chartist poets were one of the best movements ever, and I love them, and I love their poetry. I love everything about them, and I think more people should become obsessed with them, and that we should get rid of the notion of mainstream canonic literature, because these guys ate and they were not in the canon. No one gave a toss about them. So let's talk about them, okay? Because obviously I'm better than you. I know that you don't know anything about the Chartists, so let me give you a little overview to get us started, to introduce us to the Chartists. So it's basically a Victorian 19th century political working class movement that started in about 1838 and lasted till like 1857-ish. The dates are kind of, yeah. But they basically started in 1838 and it kind of tittered out towards the end. If you're going to ask me the question, oh Maddie, if you could sum up what did they do? Maybe it's not about what we do. Maybe it's about what we tried to do. Okay? I think that's a life lesson. Let's not... Value is subjective, I feel. So basically, they were, like I said, a political working class movement who were basically just fed up of how the government was being run and working and their treatment under industrialisation and capitalism and the emergence of that, working class conditions, etc. The conditions of these places were just horrific. Like, they were working 12-hour days, children were working, women were working when they shouldn't have been working. People were just working and they shouldn't have been working for the hours that they did. They shouldn't have been doing the jobs that they were doing without protective equipment, etc., etc. It was just horrific. So basically people had enough and they were like, we are the Chartists. So they basically started out by having a 6-point mantra list of what they wanted, so that when people heard about the Chartists, which they didn't, but when people heard about them, they'd be like, I know what they want. They want these 6 things, which were every man to have the vote. Crazy, guys, right? Crazy. Everyone to have the vote. Vote by secret ballot. What? That's crazy. These guys were just pulling things left, right and centre. Parliamentary elections every year. Huh? Equal size constituencies. America actually needs to learn from that one. Unfortunately, I'm saying that that's like a crazy, acting like that was mental, but America might want to adopt that one. Paid MPs. What? So we don't just have really rich people being MPs because they don't need to get paid, and we can actually have people who represent us? Whoa. And then the final one, no property qualifications, again linking to the 5th one. What? No classism for a government that's supposed to represent everyone? Too much, guys. Too much. I love when you look back at Victoria, any sort of history, even history now, to be fair, in the last 10 years, and you hear what people were fighting for, and it's wow, that's just basic human rights. Go, guys. Yes, so those were their 6 ideas. that they wanted to get, basically. And you might be thinking, oh, but like you could vote in the 19th century, which is kind of true. So the Reform Act of 1832 basically enfranchised the middle class, which sounds good in theory because you're getting more people to vote, so it's going to be fairer, right? But basically, obviously the upper class, etc., already had the vote, and then it was the middle class and the working class who didn't. They then allowed the middle class to have the vote. That creates a much worse divide of people who don't and people who do have the vote, because then you sort of conglomerate the upper class and the middle class, and the upper class were able to kind of convince the middle class that the working class were against them and weren't, they were too low for them, and that their values aligned more with the upper class, which then meant that the middle class were more susceptible to voting for policies that would support the upper class rather than the working class, who they had just been sort of with collectively, ideologically. So doing that split was very sneaky. It like quelled everyone, but then they started realising this is not what we wanted, it's not working. So then eventually in 1867, when every man got the right to vote, but obviously 1867 is quite a while away. So yeah, when people totally understand like curriculum wise why chartists aren't given a lot of attention, simply because they didn't do a lot of stuff. So like if you're gonna talk about people, you might as well talk about Edwin Chadwick, etc. People who like you can concretely say they did this, but they're still an incredibly important movement. Like working class people collectively decided that they'd had enough and they wanted to do something. I feel like that in itself is very massive and interesting, even if you don't like end up doing something concrete with that. The fact that people like collectively decided to take a stance is just really interesting, and good for the people. So also another reason why the Chartists kind of didn't work, they didn't get to do a lot of legislative change basically, was that there was this moral versus physical force dynamic. It's kind of self-explanatory, but the moral force dynamic, like we need to talk and figure this out through words and signing bills and etc, and doing this sort of like in a civil way. Moral force. Physical force dynamic was like, had enough of these guys, they're not listening to us, let's just start blowing stuff up, etc. And this was kind of a divide within the community, which obviously isn't great when you've only got a small community anyways compared to like the people who have the vote, and then it's having divisions. That's not great. Personally, why not just have a moral physical force, I'm joking, guys. But yeah, so there was sort of disagreements within the community, but it doesn't matter. So why I think Chartism and Chartist poetry specifically is so important and so good for the working class ideology and representing the working class is that it kind of disrupted and dismantled the classist notion of value. And I want to talk about value. I've already kind of touched on it. It's like, oh, they're not as important. They didn't like do concrete things, so we don't speak about them. That's a completely unfair way to look at history, first of all. Like, that's mental. Think about cultural history, the emergence of those types of history, especially in the 21st and 20th century, is we're realising that we shouldn't just look at history through like monarchical figures, through like army and military leaders, etc. Like, look at it through the people. That's giving you a lens of history that you've not considered and isn't through ideological lenses that are manipulating us. So if you look at history through, e.g., monarchical reigns, when one monarch dies and the next monarch comes in, it's not like everyone's like, right, we need to stop our culture, we need to stop all of our beliefs, stop what we're doing, and like start doing stuff under this monarch. It's like, no, things ebb and flow, things continue. History isn't in like separate blocks. So I think looking at history through the lenses of the people should not be an insane concept. So I think we should talk about the Chartists more. So especially in their poetry, like I said, they're disrupting and dismantling the class notion of value, because I think a lot of us still now consider poetry as like this far away concept that we can't relate to, or we can't understand, or it's like too complex, etc. It's not. It's really not. And like obviously you can get poems that people won't understand, and that's completely fine. It has words that are too complicated, blah blah blah. But what the Chartists are doing is using this form that is inherently representative, especially in the Victorian era, of an upper class, of a high culture, which I hate, of a high culture, and they're saying let's use it and let's talk about our low culture issues and our low culture beliefs and use our language and lingo and disrupt that and say, who says that poetry is just for upper class people? Who says that the lower class and normal people can't have poetry? Now, just for a 21st century viewership, if any of you are thinking of Rupi Kaur and saying, yeah, Rupi Kaur's like that, no. There's a difference between taste and not having taste. Okay, you can both be writing poetry that's more accessible to people, and there's a Rupi Kaur hater over here, I'm sorry guys, but I was thinking if anyone wanted a 21st century kind of poet that's kind of doing the same thing, not necessarily obviously doing the ideology of trying to get votes for everyone, like not doing such massive activist change, but maybe someone like Caroline Duffy for feminism and for women. Just her poems are really interesting, really cool, really different metaphors, but they're easy to understand. I've never read a Caroline Duffy poem and be like, I don't know what she's saying, this is too complicated, like, oh my god, she's so like much smarter than me, like she knows so many words. No, you can find a lot of poems that are incredibly moving and incredibly inciting and insightful that aren't complicated. So I want people to be shunned away from poetry, and I think a lot of us are. It's like still now, think of poetry as like this big, unattainable, untouchable, perfect thing, and it's not. So I also encourage people to write their own poetry. Yeah. So another thing is that obviously I've spoken about the classes that we see emerge in the Victorian industrial period that have never been so concrete before. Obviously we've had the gentry and the like pastoral, blah blah blah, but we've never had like these distinct classes and class identity. That is a massive thing, that identities are tied into these things, and you become, if you are in the working class, you're a working class man who has a working class wife and a working class children, and you will be working class until you die. Like that's just the identity that you are given, and that's how it works. So the imposition of class sounds and was and is, like still to this day, inherently restrictive, and it's imposing the idea that you deserve to be in this class and you can't move from this class and you don't have social mobility. That's what it does. But when you, e.g., become a chartist and you create an identity within that larger identity structure, and you're like, oh, I'm a chartist, I'm fighting for this, you take the identity of working class and mobilise it and allow it to be something of power rather than something imposed upon you. Like, none of them are saying that they're not working class. They're not necessarily saying that they don't want to be working class either. They're saying that they want just more rights. So that imposition of class makes their attempt at reform stronger, because they can say, hey, look at these middle class people and these upper class people. They hate us, they don't like us, they're going to keep using and abusing us so that they can gain capital. But we are working class, so let's work together as working class people. Being able to like reforge and recreate that identity as something that's powerful rather than something that takes away from you is like mental and so useful to them. So even though it limits them ideologically, it's not limiting them in their actions. It's allowing them to create something that's concrete. Like, you can clearly see that this isn't just like a conglomeration of people that doesn't make any sense. Everyone in this Chartist movement is working class for the working class people, wants reform for working class. And that makes sense. That should have then been an easy, smooth sailing road, but obviously when you've got upper class aristocrats, etc. in power, they never make anything easy, but the guys tried. So obviously I love poetry, so we're going to talk about poetry because I'm a lit student. But when we're reading the poems that I'm about to read, you might be thinking, oh, these are incredibly simple. Like, you know, when you're in primary school and you learn about rhyme and you rhyme words together, you're thinking, oh, this is like really simple, and I, you know, understand what they're saying so explicitly. I feel like I need to preface that, like, we shouldn't view these poems in isolation from the wider political implications, okay? So we shouldn't just read this poem and think, oh, this bit's good, this bit's bad. That's not the point of it. The point of these poems is to create social mobility, to incite people, to make people understand, and to make people relate to something on a massive collective level. That does not then correlate to saying, oh, but this isn't a good poem and the rhyme scheme here is like weird, or like, oh, they've tried doing iambic pentameter but it didn't work. That's not the point. You can do those critiques, for poets like Tennyson, who have money and have social standing and have respect and have a house that they live in by themselves and don't have to share with people, you can put those poetical judgments on those people because that is their craft. The people writing chartist poetry, that's not their craft. They're not saying, oh, I am a poet. They obviously are a poet because they're writing poetry, but that's not their be-all, end-all. These people are shoemakers, they're working in factories, blah, blah, blah. This is just something, a means to an end that allows them to communicate their ideology and what they want for people. So it's not fair to place the classist notion of value on these poems. I don't want us to limit ourselves to thinking, oh, but like this one's not as good as this one, blah, blah, blah. That's not the point of it's not the point of these things. And I think once we stop restricting ourselves to, again, the classist notion of creating value and literary worth, and we can see these not just as literary examples, but as historical tools that were used for change, were created by people for change. So the writing that they're doing is basically in and of itself an act of defence. They've infiltrated this space of high culture and said, well, we're going to write it also, and we're going to do it for ourselves, and we're going to make it actually meaningful and insightful and moving for people, rather than just a poem about how great England is and I love the king and blah, blah, blah. They're like, no, we're going to write something that's shocking and different. God forbid. So, also, I'm gonna read them off again. Guys, who would have guessed? Imagine I had me dandy trusty iPad. Yay. I'm gonna basically start with a poem from Ernest Jones, who was a very popular Chartist poet. I'm starting with him just because this poem is incredible and it's famous for a reason. However, again, I'm sure you're thinking, fame, value, I see what she's going with this, is that I'm not, after this one by Ernest Jones, I'm not going to focus on known poets, because the majority of the poetry written by Chartists was anonymous. As you can see, they're not trying to establish themselves as poets who are going to overtake Tennyson and blah, blah, blah. No, they're writing poems to put in the paper to make people think, oh, maybe we should try and get the vote and the equal size constituencies. Wow, yeah, maybe we should. I don't want to say you may take away from Chartism is that there was famous people like Ernest Jones. You don't want to think like that about a movement that is inherently about collective identity and collective trust and equality. So yes, but despite that, we're going to talk about an Ernest Jones poem anyway, just for good measure. So it's called A Chartist Chorus. I will let you read it yourselves simply because I feel I would not do it justice in reading it out loud, but I would like to read the last stanza. So, our lives are not your sheaves to glean, our rights your bales to barter. Give all their own from court to throne, but ours shall be the charter. The charter in all caps as well, but I didn't want to shout. What I want to speak about first is that this entire poem, and obviously that last stanza, is in an A-B-C-B rhyme scheme, and it's in quatrains. Now, you're thinking, I don't know anything about that. That's okay. But basically, a quatrain and having a rhyme scheme is a traditional way of writing a poem. If you think of just a standard poem and you think, how am I going to differentiate a poem from prose? Which is already a tricky, conflated idea. But anyway, poems might have a rhyme scheme. Might have, they might all have 4 lines. They might all have 6 lines, whatever. They have some sort of structure to them that works. That's traditional, right? So you're thinking, oh, he's not being very subversive and being different. No, because he's using the traditional aspects and putting words in them that you don't expect. You don't expect a poem made out of quatrains doing ABCB to start talking about rights for the people and ours shall be the charter, give all their own from court to throne. These are insane concepts, so it makes it more jarring to read that when it's in a traditional poem. And also you've got to think, these people are trying to learn how to write poems. They're going to be reading Tennyson or whatever and be like, oh, I like how he's done this and rhymed this, or done this in a quatrain or whatever. That's just how it works. If you look, none of the stresses in that quatrain that I just read out, none of the stresses are on a pronoun. Okay? Which is weird, because usually you have a da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. So if you're starting the lines with are, that should be the stress word, but it's not. Our lives. That's a larger transcendental issue from the poem. So we've got the poem here. We can see that the stress is not on the pronouns. Interesting. What does that mean in the larger ideological fight? basically, even though they have this our collective identity, collective pronoun, in conversation and in fight against the your, the others, the upper class, the middle class, ours and your, neither of those words are stressed. So this fight and this importance placed on equality in politics is not about these individual groups. So even though having that collective our identity is so important for the Chartists, they're working above that, and they're saying maybe this isn't about us as well, this is just about actual like human equality and human basics. So it's not just defined by us and you, and they appreciate that in the past and in the future there will be another our and another your, another us and them, but it's not about them because the words aren't stressed. The other words are stressed. They're placing more emphasis on the issues that they're talking about rather than the disparity between the two groups. Obviously, I've just said that the majority of them were anonymous, which is incredibly interesting, and basically all Chartist poets were published in Chartist newspapers. So, for example, the Northern Star. There was, I think it's 1938 to 1940 something, 42 maybe, is that there was like 350 poems published by about 120 anonymous authors. So it's not like we've got like 20 poems each by different authors who you kind of figure out, like, no, like there's 120 anonymous poets in the Northern Star. You can't figure out who these people are. They're just incited and inspired by the other people and writing. And if we look at the title of that Ernest Jones poem, A Chartist Chorus, if we look at the other poems that I'm about to read, What is a Peer, How to be a Great Lord, these poems are meant to be read out loud. They're meant to be like chanted at these rallies that they're doing. I'd recommend reading them out loud. And also, when I read the 6 points of the Charter, I feel like that's a poem in itself. Like, let's, hold on. Me and my trusty iPad, let me go back to the 6 points. Let me just read this out loud and tell me if you can find a difference between this and the poems I'm about to read. The Charter. Every man to have the vote by secret ballot, parliamentary elections every year with equal sized constituencies, MPs to be paid with no property qualifications. Does that not feel like a short chant? You could read that over again and again and again and again. You could have it as like 6-line stanzas and just read it again and again and again and again. So like the ideology within these poems is just this massive collective, the collective identity. So I just want to look at a few little lines from other anonymous poems before we conclude. So, what is a peer? By an anonymous poet, you guessed it. So one of the lines in the second stanza is, what is a peer? A nation's curse, a pauper on the public purse. This is so ironic. So they're saying that a peer is a pauper on the public purse, but who is the pauper? The person writing the poem. The working class is the pauper. The upper and middle classes are almost like cosplaying, like pretending to be these paupers on the public purse because they're so greedy. The money that they create from this capital could be shared with the working class, but it isn't. Another one from How to Be a Great Lord will conclude on here. This is one of my favourites because when you look at it, I'm going to show it you in case you struggle to find these, to be fair, because they're obviously anonymous. It's very dense lines. If we look at the other poems, so for example, What is a Peer? You know, they're short stanzas, very moving. How to Be a Great Lord is very dense. Kind of looks like prose, to be honest. It's so beautiful. It's just really beautiful, and it's very well crafted. So you need to look deeper at these simple poems to feel them and to move with them and kind of understand what it would have meant in a Chartist era. I'm going to read a little section. So, or a mime on the stage and becoming your part in character act and be still what thou art. Now you might have noticed there that part and art is a very simple rhyme ending. Part and art, you've just taken the 3 ending letters of part and put it as the rhyme in the second line. Part and art. Simple syntax, simple rhyming, simple things. It's easier to chant, it's easier to remember, it's easier to get your point across instead of making something really complicated and with words that maybe people didn't even like understand, or you'd have to like have read other things to get like references. It's very clear in what it's saying. It's making it simple to understand so that people can join in with it. Another line further down. God damn all the poor. Yeah. Further up. This is one of my favourite ones. With a pimp in your coach, at your table a panda. Those are 2 prepositions. So there's no actual verbs or movement. There's nothing happening in that. It's an immobile phrase, which is interesting because the working class have up to this point been immobile. They've been socially immobile by the powers that be. They've been constricted. Now that they're mobile, they're creating this narrative that it's the upper middle class who are immobile. Not because they are being forced to be immobile, but because they're just lazy and because they don't want to create social mobility and social equality. So they are immobile and they're working only in prepositions when they're being spoken about. So it's the incomplete action of the upper class. We're waiting. It's been delayed. We've got 2 prepositions. We're waiting for the verb. It never comes. It's delayed action, which therefore incites the working class to make action. Yeah. So those are my final thoughts on the chartists, because you can see I'm very passionate about them. But yeah, I think what we've learned here is that the Victorian period was very politically unstable. Working class conditions were dire, and that working class people weren't dumb, and that they wanted change and they wanted movement. So even though we don't see concrete things arising from the chartists, their existence in and of itself is a massive feat. And although we can look at, say, Dickens, etc., for a correct presentation of the working class condition, it is only when the working class themselves, e.g. the chartists, create narratives that we understand and appreciate the extent of it, their feelings, and allow them to have social mobility. The characters in Charles Dickens' novels feel very passive, in the sense that, for example, Joe the chimney sweeper in Bleak House, his story is so tragic and it's very well remembered in literature, and people are really moved and attached to his character. After he dies, there's nothing that incites us to go and make sure that all the homeless are okay. There's nothing. It's just a presentation, which is great, and I love Dickens, like I've said, and I appreciate him, and I think that in itself is great to see. But it's only when you have these chartist poets or these working class poets, writers, that you feel this urgency in their writing that you don't get from people. Dickens is a middle class, upper class man living in his own home that he can shut out everyone from. He's not going to start inciting people to riot when he's very much comfortable in his own home. So it is up to the working class.